So now that we did a lot of cleanup work, let's actually start working on our custom visual and let's write some code. We got these two important methods here, constructor and update. And as I explained, methods are basically commands that can be executed by someone else. And in our case, the someone else here is Power BI service, which is using our custom visual here. It's updating the constructor when it first renders this. So for example, also when we reload our visual code. And it's executing the update method whenever our data changes. So whenever we assign new data, whenever we set a filter, so whenever something happens that should influence our chart. Therefore, it makes sense to start with the constructor because we should be able to see changes we make there or code we write here immediately. Now, in that constructor, you might notice that we're getting this strange options thing here between these parentheses. That's a so-called parameter. It's basically some input to this command we're receiving from the one who's calling the command. So in this case, by Power BI service. Now, this options thing here is an object full of information which we can use in our code. And we can access various kinds of information that are stored in there by repeating that name, options, and then typing a dot. And here the IDE then smartly shows us what will be inside of this options object. And there is one important thing, and that's that element here. Options element in the end gives us access to the, you could say, to the canvas here, to the space where the visual should be rendered in. And options element in the end is simply a HTML element behind the scenes. So if you have some web development experience and you've worked with HTML before with JavaScript, you will notice some of the things you can do with element. For example, you can call append or append child to add a new DOM node, a new HTML element, so to say, that should show up on the screen. For example, here, we could create a brand new HTML element in code. And we do that by creating a so-called const. That's in the end just a data storage here, which we, for example, name dummy output, because I'm going to replace it later. And here we can use document, that is a globally available object which you can refer to, create element. And we can, for example, create a h1 tag here, which is a default HTML tag. And on this dummy output, we can then set the text content to hello world. And if we do that, we can take this dummy output and add it here to our chart space, to our canvas, by calling append and passing dummy output as an argument, as a parameter to append. So now here we are the one calling a command. We are calling append. This is how we do call and execute a command. We repeat its name and add parentheses thereafter. And between those parentheses, you can pass your parameter you want to pass to that, you want to provide to this command. And the append command, for example, wants to know what it should append. And here we are therefore passing our newly created element. Now you might notice that there is some leading white space here in my case. I could of course remove it manually, but it's always a good idea to use this format document functionality from time to time, either with a right click or simply with the shortcut you found there. With that, the code is reformatted. Now I saved this, and of course I still have this PBIVis start process running. And if we now reload our document here, or if we reload our chart here, we see hello world because we created this element and added it to our empty chart space through this options element. So this is how we can interact with that place that is reserved for our chart. Now, obviously, we don't want to render HTML elements or a web page there, even though we could to some extent, but instead we want to render a chart. And we'll do so soon. I just want to get you started and let you know what we have here and how we interact with the chart from inside our code. And with that, let's move on to the update command. How does this work? There we also got an options element. So let's maybe look into this element. Here, if I type a dot, we see we got different kinds of data available than in the options element we got on the constructor. And that kind of makes sense because these commands are called in different situations. Here we build the chart. We get all the core information we need for building it. Most importantly, we get access to the place where we want to render it. Update is called thereafter. So at this point, we already know where we want to create the chart. Now, therefore, in update in its options, we get additional information. For example, here, we will be able to get the data that changed so that we can update and resize our chart appropriately, for example. That's why we get extra information about this. And I will dive into more details on update later once we are able to bring something more useful to the screen. For the moment, let's instead clear all that content again, but this was for the last time, I promise. Now in the next lecture, let's finally bring something to the screen that looks at least a bit more like a chart.